Topuria right now is the number one ranking fighter right now in the UFC. I think now, after knocking Charles Oliveira, Oliveira was in the top 5, top 6. Even with some of the latest losses that Oliveira has had, Oliveira has been one of the top 5 fighters the UFC has had in a very long time. And a knockout fighter, a mixed martial artist can take you down, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, black belt. I mean, Charles Oliveira is a great fighter, but the way ILIA just knocked him out the way he did with 2 minutes and 27 seconds into the fight was just absolutely incredible. And it says a lot about who he is as a fighter, because when he comes out, there are a lot of fighters that come out and say, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and never do that. As we all know, Conor McGregor for years has done things and said things that never came to fruition. But this guy is as dominant as a fighter we've seen really since, I would say, John Jones. I mean, John Jones, who, by the way, just retired recently, and I don't think he's ever going to come back again. It's pretty obviously that he's not. But ILIA, what he did on Saturday night just shows you why the UFC has been looking for a superstar fighter to move forward with, and he is that guy. Now, is he going to stay in those weight classes? Which class is he going to stay in? And being that he has dominated his weight class, does he move up in weight class? Does he move up maybe two classes to fight against better competition? Obviously he's in a weight class right now that he has been really the best fighter in, and maybe he dips to 155, 150. Now that's a lot of weight. I think right now he would have to dip, 15 pounds? I'm not quite sure. Let's get Jake in here, because Jake is the big UFC guy, and yep. I know Jake has followed a lot of UFC fights, and I'm sure he watched this card, 317. I watched bits and pieces. I watched the final fight. I watched bits and pieces of the rear naked chokehold, which you don't see. I wanted to watch the Oliveira fight because ILIA, this fight was being, graded as one of the best fights the UFC's put together in probably the last 5 cards, and this wasn't even a fight. I mean, in 2 minutes, ILIA just pretty much dominated the fight. 2 minutes, and Charles Oliveira has never been knocked out like that, ever. I've never seen Charles Oliveira just completely get his ass knocked out the way he did. So it was incredible. That was an incredible show of just dominating, and why he's probably the best pound-for-pound fighter right now the UFC has. Charles Oliveira is one of my favorite fighters. I've always rooted for Charles because he's such a likable person and so very well respected in the UFC. He doesn't go out there and talk crap. He goes out there and fights. And even when they were doing the weigh-ins, how respectful both of these guys are to one another. You didn't, when ILIA knocked him out, he actually, after he knocked him out, he wanted to make sure that he was okay, because he was worried about Charles Oliveira getting knocked out the way he did. So it just shows you the type of respect these two guys have for one another. And yeah, I think ILIA is the best pound-for-pound fighter right now the UFC has to offer. But that says a lot about who he is. This guy, if you remember when he came into the UFC, he had to work his way up to the top. And the UFC never gave him any light move, lightweight all the way to the top. He had to earn his way to the top. When you talk about Conor McGregor, when he came into the UFC, it took maybe 3 or 4 fights before the UFC, and obviously Dana White fell in love with him. And then he was moving up in rankings so fast. This guy, it took him a while to get where he was. And now, he's 27, 28 years old. He's unbelievable. I honestly think right now there's nobody in the UFC that could beat this guy in 3 different classes. He can move up 10 more pounds, 15 more pounds. This guy is one of the best boxers, stand-up fighters I've seen in a very long time, really since John Jones. I mean, you look at John Jones and what he could do with his legs and throwing punches, his combinations. That's what this kid can do. I mean, he could do so many things. And by the way, he trains. He does kickboxing, Muay Thai. This guy is as good a fighter, all-around fighter we've seen in a very, very long time.
I think you're definitely right. You point out the fact with ILIA Topuria and how the similarities with Conor McGregor. I just had to put this photo up here really quick. I saw this. ILIA he apparently DM'd Conor McGregor way back in the day. This post right here, and Conor just put it up on his social media from not too long ago. Right there, congratulations! I'm going to be you someday. It's just fair play, son. And I think it's such an interesting thing to think about that. ILIA. I'm not calling him Conor McGregor, but he definitely has that fighting style, that quickness, that pull, that star power. And like you and me, we were going back and forth about how
Yep.
who should be the next face of the UFC, and we were talking about Merab, and he
Mhm.
definitely has the skill. But Ilya has that star power aura, whereas Merab's kind of he does run his mouth at times, but he's a little bit more quiet. He's more humble. Ilya has that like booming confidence on the brink of cockiness, and it's like it's such a strange thing because you like want to hate on Ilya, but then again he is very respectful. Like I couldn't believe like at the press fight or pre-fight press conference.
Mm-hmm.
He was straight up telling Charles Oliveira to his face, "This isn't how I wanted to do it. I wanted to fight Makhachev," and he said, "I've already won. I've got the victory." And like in his face, and I'm like, how can you say that to him, man? Like you're about to go to war with this guy, and you're telling him, "I already beat you." And literally, he said, "I'm gonna knock
Then to
Charles
call it out in
Oliveira
the
out."
first round.
Right? Yeah, like Joba, you're right. He said, "I'm gonna knock him out in the first round," and he did it with ease. Like I will say this, Charles, that one moment he had in the match where he had Ilya in the heel hook. If he clamped that in and he got it on Ilya, he probably would have because a heel it's one of the worst injuries you can have in UFC. Like it's something that you do not want to stay in.
Connected to your Achilles tendon. If once you get a heel hook, you can rip somebody's Achilles tendon that quick.
But I will say, Ilya, he didn't panic. He didn't forget. He scrambled like confidently almost, which was insane because it's like normally most times fighters in there, they panic and, it's like you get twitchy, especially with Charles Oliveira. You saw once he was on the ground, like Ilya was kicking him a couple of times, but he didn't want to go to the ground with Ilya at all. But even when he was in that dangerous position, he didn't panic. He didn't scramble like in a fear. He was confident. He got out of it quickly. He kept tagging Charles. And what was interesting to me is that Charles pursued Ilya a lot in that fight. Like Ilya normally is pressuring all of his opponents. And despite the fact he's only 5'7", and I don't believe his reach is very long, and Charles had such a huge frame and a reach compared to Ilya, but he was pressuring Ilya the whole time. So it was almost like Ilya baited him in, just waited for him to keep coming and keep popping in with that jab, and then he found that right hand and knocked him out.
You mentioned Merab, and the only reason why I think Ilya right now is a little bit ahead of Merab right now because Merab is a small guy. I don't know if he can fight in any higher or bigger weight classes because he's really small. Ilya, he's not a small man. The guy he drops like 30 pounds before his fights. He could fight. He could fight at 175. He could fight at 185 if he really wants to. And he throws really, really hard. And the ability that he has, the way he throws, he could fight in the higher weight classes and knock a lot of guys out in the bigger and the heavier weight classes. So that's why I think Ilya is the best fighter, best pound-for-pound fighter right now the UFC has. And it's so funny because Joe Rogan, after the fight, and the way Joe Rogan wanted to get on his hands and knees and suck him off. I mean, Joe Rogan absolutely loves Ilya. And you saw it after the fight. Oh, you're the greatest fighter. This is one of the greatest dominating fights against one of the greatest fighters the UFC has ever had. And really, Charles Oliveira is a great UFC fighter. This guy has been a multiple champion. This guy is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's a good boxer. He's a good wrestler. His all-around fight games is as good as we've seen in a very, very long time. And then this guy goes into the ring and says, I'm going to knock you out in the first round and embarrass him right in front of a national crowd and national fans around the world and just really showed why the UFC now has the next guy. And by the way, Ilya is so much better than Conor McGregor ever was. For anybody to think that, you're trying to compare who is better at the top of their game, Ilya is a better fighter than Conor McGregor was. Now, Conor McGregor had that knockout punch. He had that left hand. We all know what Conor McGregor is. He was more of a boxer. His Muay Thai sucked. His ground fighting sucked. He had no stamina whatsoever. Ilya has stamina. He's got the ground fighting. He's got the stand-up power. He's got everything. So for anybody to try to compare Ilya to Conor, there's no comparison. Ilya, if he fought Conor McGregor at the top of his game, he knocks Conor McGregor out.
I will say I would have loved to see that fight. I think it would be kind of close just because of, if you remember Prime Conor, just how he had that. I understand his stamina was not there, and Ilya was definitely a better ground fighter. We haven't really seen it, though, because Ilya's just been knocking everybody out left and right, but he definitely was a better. Conor was a very, traditional striker, and then, of course, he worked on his boxing when he went to go fight Floyd Money Mayweather and things of that nature. But it would be interesting to see. But, I think I honestly, and maybe this is just recency bias, but I might have to give it to Ilya because it's his power. Again, and he's fast. Like Conor was the same way, but Ilya, it's just like it's lightning quick, and it just comes out of nowhere, and it doesn't really make sense. And the fact that he moved up to the weight, and it seems like the power's still there. That's what's crazy to me. And I know we talked about, you said he could probably move up another weight class personally, but I think what's going to happen is, depending on whatever happens with Islam Makhachev and Jack Della Maddalena at
You're good with the names. I'm not going to lie with you on that.
Depending on what happens at welterweight, whether Islam is to win or lose, I think Ilya will probably wait for Islam. Personally, I'm a big Justin Gaethje fan, so I would love to see Justin Gaethje fight ILIA Topuria, because I think Justin Gaethje does have the power to match Topuria, although I am worried about his speed, because I feel like he would be really fast.
He drops his hands too much. Gaethje drops his
hands
too much.
I'm not his defense it does scare me a lot of times, because he eats a lot of shots, and you can't with Ilya, you cannot get tagged over and over again.
Ilya also is an amazing. He has an amazing jab. He can throw the jab, and he sets up his punches so. Ilya, to me, when you look at the context of trying to compare his skill, his stand-up skill to somebody, it would probably be John Jones. That would be the guy. John Jones, obviously bigger and stronger than he was. But what Ilya does so well is his stand-up game, the way he sets up punches, the way he sets up combinations. And then he doesn't need to take you down. He dominates you from the waist up, and he makes sure that you can feel how hard he throws his punches. As a matter of fact, Charles Oliviera at the press conference after the fight, he says, that was the hardest punch I've ever felt in my UFC career. Could you imagine Oliveira coming out and saying that? And he's fought some of the best fighters the UFC's ever had. And he said, that was one of the hardest punches I've ever felt in my career. That says a lot about the power Ilya has and what he can do to people. It doesn't matter what weight class. That's what makes him special. And again, I'm going to tell you this right now. I don't think this guy's going to be beaten. I don't care. In the next 3 years, I think this guy's going to dominate. He's going to give up one of those belts. I wouldn't even be surprised if he says, okay, I'm dominated this division. I've dominated this division. I want to go into this division because I want to be the first 3-division champion the UFC's ever had.